Imagine a world at war, a world where enemies are defeated on foreign soil, but secretly some are brought right to your backyard. Hidden behind barbed wire and guarded by men in crisp uniforms, thousands of German prisoners of war quietly arrived in the United States during World War II. Most Americans never knew. Schools continued, factories hummed, and families went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their neighbors might be living just miles from a camp filled with men trained to fight, to escape, and to survive at any cost. It began in 1942, after the United States entered the war. Ships carried hundreds of prisoners from battlefields in North Africa and Europe, docking at ports along the East Coast under the cover of secrecy. Soldiers escorted them inland to places so remote that locals scarcely believed the rumors. Camps were scattered across farmland, forests, and even small towns where the population was sparse enough to prevent widespread panic. Yet despite the official secrecy, whispers began to circulate, rumors of strange visitors, strange languages, and guarded compounds that seemed out of place in otherwise quiet towns. Inside these camps, life was rigidly controlled. Prisoners were confined behind fences topped with barbed wire, patrolled by armed guards who were ordered to treat them humanely, yet keep every movement in check. But the tension was palpable. These men were soldiers of the Reich, and while many were exhausted from war, others were cunning, suspicious, and restless. Every glance, every whispered word between prisoners or guards could carry meaning. Every small act, like the way a prisoner folded his uniform or spoke with his fellow inmate, might reveal loyalty, betrayal, or even a plan to escape. For Americans who stumbled across these camps, the sight was unsettling. Children walking to school would pass guards with rifles. Civilians noticed trucks unloading supplies for men they were told were enemy combatants, and some locals even glimpsed the occasional prisoner working in the fields. It was a strange coexistence, curiosity mixed with unease. People whispered in hushed tones, speculating about who these men were and what they might be planning. The truth, however, remained buried behind military orders and strict confidentiality. And yet, even as the world battled in Europe, these prisoners became a hidden piece of the American war effort. Their presence was officially acknowledged in some government documents, but deliberately downplayed in newspapers, speeches, and public records. To the average American, the war seemed distant, fought on foreign soil, but just beyond the horizon of normal life, the US was hosting a secret network of enemy soldiers. The real shock: some of these prisoners weren't ordinary soldiers. Among them were trained operatives, engineers, and men who had witnessed the darkest corners of Hitler's military machine. What they knew, what they could plan, and who they might influence was a secret that American authorities guarded fiercely. And as the barbed wire fences rattled in the wind, a silent question hung in the air. What would happen if this carefully maintained secrecy unraveled? The hidden prisoners of America were more than just captives. They were a ticking mystery, a reminder that even on home soil, war had its shadows. And as we begin to uncover their stories, we realize that the history we thought we knew might only be the surface of a much deeper, more unsettling truth. Life behind the barbed wire was a strange, claustrophobic world of routine, hierarchy, and unspoken tension. For the thousands of German prisoners brought to America, every day was measured, controlled, and watched. Yet underneath the strict rules, a hidden drama unfolded, one that few Americans ever imagined. The camps themselves were often sprawling complexes, surrounded by fences topped with barbed wire, watchtowers at regular intervals, and armed guards patrolling the perimeter day and night. Prisoners slept in long, bare barracks, where rows of cots stretched across dimly lit rooms. Each prisoner was assigned a number, a routine, and a work detail. Some tended the fields, planting crops to support the war effort. Others worked in kitchens, laundries, or workshops, repairing equipment. The monotony was crushing, yet there was always an undercurrent of restlessness. After all, these men had been trained to fight, to plan, to survive. Inside the camps, a strict hierarchy emerged. Older, more experienced soldiers often claimed authority over younger men. They organized daily routines, mediated disputes, and even maintained a code of honor, one that sometimes clashed with the American rules enforced by the guards. The guards themselves were a mixture of young draftees and seasoned soldiers. Some were strict, some indifferent, and a rare few treated the prisoners with unexpected kindness, offering small gestures that could spark hope in the otherwise bleak environment. Despite the controlled setting, the prisoners found ways to assert their humanity. They formed friendships, shared stories of home, sang songs quietly at night, and even staged makeshift soccer games. But these small joys were fragile. Suspicion was constant. Guards monitored letters and packages, and any misstep could result in punishment, often a solitary confinement or extended work detail. And for some prisoners, the longing for freedom gnawed at them relentlessly. Escape attempts, though rare, were always dramatic. One man, a young officer from Berlin, once tried to climb the fence under cover of darkness, only to be caught halfway, his limbs scratched and bleeding, his eyes filled with both defiance and despair. The entire camp watched quietly afterward, a mix of fear and admiration in their eyes. Cultural clashes added another layer of tension. Prisoners from urban Germany found rural American camps alien and isolating. Language barriers and differences in customs led to misunderstandings, sometimes escalating into fights or grudging alliances. Yet amidst these struggles, moments of empathy occasionally emerged. Some guards would discreetly offer cigarettes or extra rations, and in rare cases, prisoners and guards would converse. Learning glimpses about life on the other side of the Atlantic, psychological stress was another invisible enemy. Prisoners lived with the uncertainty of war, not knowing if they would ever return home. Letters from family were censored and delayed, leaving men desperate for news. The monotony of camp life, coupled with the isolation, caused depression, irritability, and tension between prisoners. Yet resilience also emerged. Many found ways to adapt, creating routines, exercising, and seeking purpose in small victories, like mastering English, helping fellow prisoners, or crafting small items from scrap. The American authorities were keenly aware of these dynamics. Officers conducted regular inspections, monitored communications, and sometimes used psychological tactics to prevent unrest. They understood that while the prisoners were captives, they were also trained soldiers with minds accustomed to strategy, discipline, and cunning. This constant interplay of control, resistance, and adaptation created a tense equilibrium, one that could collapse with the slightest provocation. Even in the harshness of imprisonment, moments of humanity shone through. Some prisoners secretly celebrated birthdays or religious holidays, crafting small decorations from scraps. Others formed study groups, teaching each other languages, math, or even philosophy. It was an attempt to preserve identity and dignity in a world designed to strip it away. Yet the shadow of war always loomed. Guards knew these men had fought for an ideology that had ravaged the globe, and prisoners knew that despite their captivity, suspicion would always follow them. The tension in the camps was not just between prisoners and guards, it was internal. Every man wrestled with guilt, fear, and longing. Some mourned lost comrades, while others feared the judgment of their countrymen if they survived. And in this fragile balance, tiny sparks of rebellion could ignite, threatening to unravel the careful order imposed by the Americans. By the end of each day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the camp settled into a fragile silence. Men whispered quietly in their barracks, plotting, reminiscing, or simply trying to sleep. The fences glinted in the moonlight, a constant reminder that freedom was just out of reach. And for the Americans watching over them, there was an unspoken question. Could they truly control men trained to fight, to deceive, and to survive? Life behind the barbed wire was more than mere imprisonment. It was a delicate, tense world where human resilience clashed with suspicion, where friendships and rivalries coexisted, and where every day carried the quiet weight of uncertainty. And in that world, the story of Germany's secret prisoners in America began to unfold. One tense human moment at a time, behind the fences of American POW camps, life appeared orderly on the surface, but beneath that veneer, a web of secrets and subterfuge quietly pulsed. Not every German prisoner was an ordinary soldier. Among the men captured and transported to the United States were officers trained in intelligence, engineers who had worked on advanced weaponry, and even men suspected of espionage. Their presence transformed these seemingly peaceful camps into high-stakes arenas where every glance, word, or letter could carry dangerous information. American authorities quickly realized that the risk was greater than they had anticipated. A simple act of defiance, a coded letter, a whispered plan, a clandestine conversation could ripple outward, potentially revealing military secrets or even inspiring escape attempts. As a result, the camps became more than prisons. They were laboratories for surveillance, psychology, and control. Guards were trained to watch not only actions, but expressions. Officers sifted through mail with meticulous care, and even casual interactions were logged in detailed reports, as if the prisoners' thoughts themselves could be captured and contained. Some prisoners, aware of the scrutiny, became masters of subtlety. They communicated in ways that appeared innocuous, but were loaded with hidden meaning. Numbers scrawled on walls, the placement of objects in barracks, or the timing of seemingly random conversations could all serve as coded signals. One prisoner, a former officer in the Wehrmacht, reportedly memorized complex messages and passed them to trusted comrades during work details in the fields. These messages were designed to coordinate behavior, record observations about American life, and, in some cases, test the boundaries of the surveillance imposed on them. The ingenuity and audacity of such actions left guards both wary and fascinated, aware that the enemy could still outthink them, even in captivity. Some prisoners were scientists who had contributed to Germany's military advancements. Engineers and chemists quietly observed, documented, and experimented wherever possible. The U.S. military, while aware of their potential, sometimes relied on them for labor in technical projects, hoping to extract useful knowledge while minimizing risk. Yet the knowledge these men carried, knowledge of explosives, secret weapon designs, and advanced military strategy, was a constant source of anxiety for American authorities. Every experiment, every conversation, could hold clues to plans that extended far beyond the fences of the camp. Suspicion and paranoia became constant companions in these camps. Prisoners watched each other, aware that informants might report disloyalty. Guards, in turn, monitored interactions with vigilance bordering on obsession. Rumors spread of hidden compartments, smuggled messages, and prisoners who claimed to have connections still active in Europe. Even seemingly trivial behaviors, a prisoner asking too many questions about a guard's routine, or lingering near the perimeter at unusual times, were interpreted as potential threats. The stakes were highest when coded messages were discovered. American cryptologists occasionally intercepted letters or notes written in complex ciphers. Some used symbols disguised as doodles, while others employed phonetic codes or foreign slang designed to hide meaning from untrained eyes. Each discovery sent ripples of fear through camp authorities. What if these messages contained escape plans? What if they carried intelligence meant for the Nazi leadership? The line between routine monitoring and life-or-death urgency was often blurred, yet amidst the fear and tension, prisoners displayed remarkable cunning. They formed secret alliances, passing knowledge discreetly and observing guards for weaknesses. Some orchestrated subtle acts of rebellion, testing American vigilance. Others sought to preserve knowledge, to ensure that their expertise or experiences were not lost even in captivity. The camp became a chessboard, where strategy, patience, and observation mattered more than brute strength. The American government responded with a mixture of caution and innovation. Surveillance techniques were refined, including careful tracking of prisoner behavior, detailed reports on communications, and psychological profiling to anticipate potential threats. Commanders developed contingency plans for escapes or sabotage, knowing that even a single act of subversion could have severe consequences. In some cases, prisoners were moved between camps to prevent the formation of dangerous alliances or to isolate suspected leaders. The true danger, however, was not always physical. It was the uncertainty, the invisible threat that lurked in the shadows. Guards and officers could never be sure who was loyal, who was planning, or who was simply pretending. Every day behind the barbed wire was a battle of minds, a silent contest of observation and deception. And in this environment, the line between captor and captive often blurred, as both sides navigated a world built on mistrust, intelligence, and subtle power plays. As the sun set over the camps, the prisoners retired to their barracks, but the tension never fully dissipated. I scanned for hidden signals, ears listened for coded speech, and every movement could be a clue or a trap. These were not just men in captivity. They were soldiers, scientists, and spies living in a delicate equilibrium, each day a test of ingenuity, patience, and resilience. The hidden prisoners of America were no ordinary captives. They were a shadowy underworld of intelligence, secrets, and silent plots. And as the war raged on across the globe, the stakes of this silent battle inside American soil grew higher with every passing day, leaving both captors and captives to wonder who would make the next move and what would it cost. As German prisoners settled into the remote corners of America, the response from the U.S. government was calculated, deliberate, and sometimes conflicted. These were not just ordinary captives. They were trained soldiers, engineers, and men who had fought for an ideology that had caused devastation across the globe. The challenge was clear: how to contain them, monitor them, and extract any potential value, all while maintaining security and navigating moral responsibilities. Across the country, camps became microcosms of tension between duty and empathy. Guards were tasked with enforcing strict rules, but many found themselves grappling with the humanity of their prisoners. Some saw young men who were far from home, scared and desperate, while others recognized the very same faces that had been trained to fight American soldiers just years before. This moral ambiguity created unease. Guards could not ignore the reality that these men were human, even if they were enemies. American authorities also saw practical opportunities. Prisoners were assigned to labor details, often working on farms, in factories, or in public projects. Fields across the Midwest were tended by German hands. Crops were harvested, barns repaired, and infrastructure maintained. For many farmers, this labor was essential, filling gaps left by the wartime workforce. Yet it was a tense arrangement. Locals often knew the men were prisoners of war, but had little idea of who they truly were or what they were capable of. Fear mingled with curiosity, and stories spread of strange behaviors, whispered conversations, and sudden disappearances within the camps. Some towns were stunned when the presence of POWs became apparent. Children noticed guards with rifles near schoolyards. Merchants spotted unfamiliar faces working in fields. Neighbors whispered about foreign accents and odd habits. In a few cases, townsfolk developed cautious relationships with prisoners, exchanging greetings, gifts, or even small acts of kindness. These interactions, however brief, created friction between duty and empathy, as Americans balanced fear, morality, and curiosity. Propaganda played a subtle but significant role. The government released controlled information to the public, emphasizing that prisoners were treated humanely under the Geneva Conventions, yet keeping details about numbers, locations, and prisoner identities vague. Posters, pamphlets, and speeches reinforced loyalty and vigilance at home, reminding citizens that the war was still ongoing and that threats could emerge anywhere, even in their own communities. Meanwhile, misinformation sometimes spread unintentionally, adding to suspicion and tension. Rumors of escape attempts, hidden Nazi sympathizers, or sabotage inflamed anxiety, and local law enforcement often had to investigate these claims carefully. Monitoring the camps was a meticulous process. Officers maintained detailed records of prisoner movements, work assignments, and behavior. Guards were trained to observe not only physical actions, but also subtle signals. Body language, eye contact, and even tone of voice could indicate loyalty, deception, or disobedience. High-priority prisoners, such as former officers or engineers, were watched particularly closely, their work and interactions scrutinized for potential intelligence risks. When patterns or anomalies emerged, authorities acted swiftly to separate groups, impose stricter surveillance, or move prisoners to different facilities. Yet even as Americans implemented these measures, tensions arose between pragmatism and morality. Labor assignments provided essential support for the war effort, but questions lingered. Was it ethical to exploit enemy soldiers for economic gain? How far could compassion extend when the prisoners' loyalty and intentions were uncertain? In some instances, guards and supervisors wrestled with these dilemmas quietly, offering small concessions, extra rations, access to books, or brief moments of respite, while remaining acutely aware of their responsibilities. The psychological impact on communities was profound. Small towns that had never experienced war firsthand suddenly faced the strange reality of foreign soldiers living and working among them. Trust became a scarce commodity. Some locals feared that prisoners were plotting escapes or influencing young people. Others were conflicted by empathy, recognizing the shared human experience of fear, loss, and longing. Families whispered about the unknown men in their fields and streets, while children asked uncomfortable questions about the enemy so close to home. In the broader context, the government's response reflected the tightrope it had to walk, maintaining security, exploiting labor where possible, and avoiding public panic. They achieved this through secrecy, vigilance, and a careful balance of control and humane treatment. But beneath the official strategies, the moral and emotional complexities of hosting these hidden prisoners lingered, shaping the lives of both captives and Americans in ways that would resonate long after the war ended. By the time night fell over the camps, a quiet unease settled over towns and barracks alike. Guards reflected on the day's observations, prisoners whispered about what lay ahead, and communities adjusted to the reality that the war was not just overseas, it was part of their daily lives, hidden in plain sight. The presence of these German captives was more than a military necessity. It was a test of empathy, vigilance, and morality, one that would leave lasting impressions on every American who lived near them. The story of these secret prisoners was no longer confined behind barbed wire. It had seeped into the fabric of everyday life, challenging assumptions about duty, humanity, and the true cost of war. And as Americans and prisoners alike navigated this tense, delicate balance, the hidden drama inside these camps continued to unfold, setting the stage for revelations, escapes, and the shocking truths that would later emerge. The camps had always seemed quiet from the outside. Neat rows of barracks, fences glinting in the sunlight, guards patrolling methodically, but inside tension simmered. Some prisoners refused to accept their confinement passively. Whispers of escape, rebellion, and cunning plans circulated through the barracks like an electric current, invisible to the casual observer, but unmistakably real to those who watched closely. Escape attempts were daring, audacious, and sometimes almost comical in their ingenuity. One group of prisoners dug a tunnel beneath the perimeter fence, working by night with spoons and scrap metal, carefully disposing of the soil in hidden pockets around the camp. They timed their efforts with the guards' routines, listening for patrols, noting the rotation of the towers, and coordinating shifts like seasoned strategists. When the tunnel was finally discovered, the guards were stunned not only by the prisoners' initiative, but by the sophistication of the operation. It was a reminder. These were men trained to think, to adapt, to survive. Other escapes were more daring, if reckless. A small group attempted to sneak out disguised in guards' uniforms, bluffing their way through checkpoints and passing trucks. Some prisoners faked illnesses or feigned mechanical work duties to gain temporary freedom within the camp, testing the vigilance of their captors. Each attempt, whether successful or thwarted, added to the psychological pressure on both prisoners and guards. Trust became impossible. Suspicion hung thick in the air, and every glance or gesture could be interpreted as a signal, a plot, or a warning. But it wasn't all individual cunning. There were small rebellions that hinted at organized defiance. One incident involved a group refusing to work in the fields, claiming illness en masse. The guards responded cautiously, understanding that harsh punishment could provoke unrest or sympathy from local civilians. After tense negotiations and strategic isolation of perceived ringleaders, the situation was contained, but it left a lingering unease. The camp had become a delicate balance of control and resistance, a silent chess game where each side anticipated the other's move. Amid this tension, a shocking revelation emerged. Some prisoners were quietly cooperating with sympathetic Americans. Not all locals viewed the men as enemies. A few, motivated by curiosity, compassion, or ideology, provided subtle assistance. Supplies were smuggled, instructions passed, and even intelligence shared, creating a hidden network that blurred the lines between captor and captive. It was a dangerous game. Guards were acutely aware of these hidden alliances, and when any hint of cooperation was discovered, investigations intensified. Yet the very existence of these clandestine connections revealed an uncomfortable truth. The boundaries of loyalty, morality, and trust were far more complicated than anyone had imagined. Intelligence breakthroughs added another layer of drama. In one instance, a prisoner's meticulous notes on American military logistics were intercepted, prompting immediate reassessment of camp security. These discoveries forced the U.S. military to rethink surveillance protocols, work assignments, and communications. Officers realized that the threat wasn't just physical, it was intellectual, subtle, and potentially devastating. Every prisoner carried knowledge, skills, or networks that could tip the balance if leveraged correctly. The psychological toll was immense. Guards grew wary, prisoners grew restless, and tension crackled in the air like static. Every meal, every work detail, every casual exchange held the possibility of revelation. One moment of carelessness could expose a plan. One lapse in vigilance could allow an escape or leak critical information. Suspense was constant, palpable, and unrelenting, and then came the moment that shook the camp entirely. During a routine inspection, officers discovered coded messages embedded in laundry instructions, cleverly disguised as mundane details. The revelation stunned the administration. Prisoners had been communicating complex plans for weeks without detection. It was a testament to their intelligence, patience, and resourcefulness, and a chilling reminder of how close the camps had come to chaos. Yet, even as the tension reached its peak, the story revealed an unexpected human dimension. Some guards, witnesses to the prisoners' ingenuity and resilience, felt a grudging respect. Some prisoners, exhausted by the constant stress and uncertainty, began to show small acts of vulnerability or cooperation. The enemy, it seemed, was not always the faceless figure imagined in propaganda. They were human, capable of cunning, courage, and even empathy under extraordinary circumstances. By the end of the day, the camp had returned to its fragile equilibrium, but the air was thick with anticipation. Every glance across the barracks, every whispered word in the night, hinted that the delicate balance of control could shatter at any moment. Prisoners plotted silently, guards watched anxiously, and the hidden tension of war continued to hum beneath the surface. This was the high point of the story, the climax where ingenuity, desperation, and hidden alliances converged. It was a reminder that war does not end at the battlefield, that captivity is never simple, and that even in the most controlled environments, human nature finds a way to assert itself. And as night fell over the camp, one unspoken question remained: who would make the next move, and what consequences would follow? When the war finally ended in 1945, the world exhaled in relief. But the story of the German prisoners in America did not conclude with celebration. For thousands of men who had spent years behind barbed wire, The transition from captivity to freedom was complicated, shadowed by secrecy, bureaucracy, and the weight of memories that could not be erased. Prisoners were gradually repatriated to Germany, but the process was slow and fraught with uncertainty. Many returned to a homeland ravaged by bombing, hunger, and occupation. Families were scattered, homes destroyed, and entire communities struggling to rebuild. For some men, the relief of release was tempered by guilt, regret, and the trauma of confinement. Letters from loved ones that had been delayed or censored for years now arrived, sometimes revealing shocking news of loss or hardship, further complicating the emotional landscape of homecoming. Yet not all prisoners left quietly. Some had formed unexpected bonds in America with guards, fellow prisoners, or local townspeople. In small towns where POWs had worked on farms or in factories, lingering friendships persisted. Stories circulated of former prisoners returning years later to visit towns where they had been assigned labor details, greeted by families who remembered them not as enemies, but as young men struggling to survive. In some cases, these relationships became enduring connections, transcending the bitterness of war and defying expectations of animosity. The secrecy surrounding the camps did not end with the war. Government files remained classified for decades, and many Americans had no idea that their communities had hosted enemy soldiers. In towns near former camps, memories faded into whispers. Children grew up unaware that the friendly young men helping in the fields during the war were once trained soldiers of the Third Reich. The hidden presence of POWs had left subtle but lasting imprints on communities, socially, economically, and emotionally. For the prisoners themselves, the legacy was complex. Some spoke of their captivity as a period of survival and reflection. They had endured not only confinement, but also the challenge of preserving dignity, forging alliances, and navigating moral and psychological pressures. These experiences shaped who they became after returning home. Many men found it difficult to share their stories, aware that outsiders might misunderstand or judge them. Yet the lessons learned, resilience, ingenuity, and even empathy stayed with them for life. In America, the camp's presence had also left a subtle cultural imprint. Local residents who had interacted with prisoners often remembered the experience vividly. Farmers recalled the hard work and the quiet determination of the men in their fields. Children remembered the curiosity, the accents, the small acts of kindness or shared games. These memories, passed down through generations, became a hidden layer of American history, an intimate glimpse into the complexity of war and the shared humanity that can persist even between enemies. Some former prisoners returned to America decades later, drawn back by the bonds they had formed. They visited towns where they had once labored, spoke to families who had welcomed them cautiously, and reflected on the irony of their presence. Men who had been enemies, once confined under armed watch, now greeted as human beings with shared history. In these reunions, the artificial lines of war blurred, replaced by recognition of resilience, courage, and the endurance of human connection. The hidden legacy also extended to lessons for the broader society. The camps revealed how war could infiltrate domestic life, how secrecy and surveillance shaped communities, and how empathy and understanding could coexist with duty and vigilance. Americans who had lived near the camps were forced to grapple with moral ambiguity, the necessity of confinement versus the humanity of those confined, the tension between fear and compassion. These lessons endured long after the last prisoner departed, yet even as decades passed, shadows lingered. Many stories remained untold, tucked away in classified files, personal diaries, or fading memories. The narrative of secret prisoners in America was a silent undercurrent of history, one that reminded both Americans and Germans that war's effects are rarely confined to the battlefield. They ripple through lives, shaping identity, morality, and the perception of humanity in ways that persist long after the guns have fallen silent. By the time the camps were dismantled and fences removed, the physical evidence of imprisonment had largely vanished. What remained were stories of survival, resilience, and unexpected connection. Former prisoners carried them across oceans, while American towns preserved them in quiet recollections, photographs, and whispered memories. The hidden legacy of Germany's secret prisoners in America was not only a tale of captivity, but a reminder that even in the darkest chapters of war, human bonds and the capacity for understanding could endure. The barbed wire was gone. The guards long retired, but the echoes of those years lingered, quiet, persistent and profound. The story of these hidden prisoners reminds us that history often holds layers unseen, truths that challenge our assumptions, and moments of humanity where we least expect them. And in reflecting on their journey, we are left with a bittersweet realization. Even in secrecy and captivity, the human spirit finds ways to connect, survive, and leave a mark that time cannot erase. History is rarely as simple as textbooks make it seem. Behind the neatly printed dates and battle maps lies a hidden chapter, one that few Americans even knew existed. The story of thousands of German prisoners quietly held in camps across the United States during World War II. These were men whose lives were caught between loyalty, survival, and the unexpected reality of captivity on foreign soil, a reality that challenged notions of friend, foe, and the very meaning of war. The shocking truth is that these prisoners were not all ordinary soldiers. Some were engineers, scientists, or highly trained operatives, their knowledge coveted and feared. They lived under strict surveillance, yet even behind fences and barbed wire, they found ways to communicate, to strategize, and to assert small forms of agency. Escape attempts, coded messages, and subtle acts of rebellion revealed that captivity did not erase skill, ingenuity, or willpower. These were men who had survived battles in Europe and North Africa, only to find themselves tested in a new and unexpected theater, the quiet towns, farms, and forests of America. For the American communities around them, the presence of these hidden prisoners created moral and emotional tension. Farmers relied on their labor yet remained wary. Townsfolk encountered them, yet never fully understood them. Children saw them, yet could not grasp the complexity of their roles. Guards were caught between duty and empathy, enforcing order while occasionally recognizing the humanity of those they oversaw. The war, it seemed, had seeped into the domestic landscape, transforming ordinary places into arenas of vigilance, trust, and unease. Yet what emerges most vividly from this hidden chapter is the interplay of loyalty and survival. Some prisoners remained steadfast in their allegiance to Germany, maintaining discipline and coordination even in confinement. Others found unexpected humanity in small acts of cooperation or connection with Americans, moments that transcended the boundaries of enemy and ally. Stories abound of men returning years later to towns where they had been temporarily confined, greeted not with hostility, but with recognition and even friendship. Loyalty and survival, it turns out, were not mutually exclusive. They could coexist in the complicated, shadowed world of captivity. The secrecy surrounding these camps endured long after the last prisoner departed. Government files remained classified for decades. Newspapers barely mentioned the camps. Communities carried memories in quiet whispers and family stories. The hidden prisoners became ghosts of history, their presence known only to those who lived through it or to the careful archivists who preserved their files. Yet even in absence, they left an imprint on towns, on families, and on the collective understanding of war's reach. Reflecting on their stories, we confront lessons about the human spirit. Secrecy, surveillance, and control were necessary for safety, yet they were never absolute. Creativity, resilience, and intelligence allowed prisoners to navigate captivity in ways that surprised even their captors. Moral ambiguity permeated the camps, teaching lessons about empathy, trust, and the complex realities of duty. And in the quiet moments of reflection, we realize that even amid conflict, The human capacity for understanding and connection endures. The narrative of Germany's secret prisoners in America also forces a re-evaluation of what history remembers and what it forgets. While textbooks recount battles and treaties, the hidden stories of daily struggle, ingenious defiance, and unexpected bonds often vanish into obscurity. It's in these overlooked moments that the real texture of history emerges, a history of human resilience, moral conflict, and survival under extraordinary circumstances. And yet, despite the decades that have passed, the story remains incomplete. Scholars continue to uncover files, diaries, and letters that reveal new dimensions of life behind the fences. Descendants of prisoners and American townspeople alike occasionally rediscover forgotten connections, challenging assumptions about identity, loyalty, and memory. The past, it seems, is not fixed. It continues to reveal secrets to those willing to look. As we close the chapter on this hidden world, we are left with awe and curiosity. Thousands of men, once enemies, lived quietly among Americans, shaping communities, influencing lives, and leaving traces of stories that were never meant to be fully known. They remind us that history is layered, that war does not end with surrender, and that human resilience finds expression even in the most constrained circumstances. The hidden prisoners of America were more than a footnote. They were a living testament to the complexity of war, the endurance of the human spirit, and the fragile, often overlooked threads that connect us all. And even now, as we uncover their stories, one thought remains. For every secret that history has revealed, countless others may still lie buried, waiting for someone to remember, to reflect, and to wonder. The fences have long been dismantled, the guards long retired, and the prisoners gone, but the echoes of those years remain. The hidden legacy of loyalty, survival, and human ingenuity continues to challenge our understanding of the past. And perhaps the most unsettling realization of all is this: the history we think we know is only part of the story, and what was forgotten may yet hold truths more extraordinary than we can imagine.